Okay, okay. Our next conversation is about money. Money in our pocket, money out of employers.
Hey.
Okay. And so our guest is the CEO of the Federation of Kenya Employers. And this is an organization, umbrella organization of the private sector that, there are various private sector organizations, umbrella organizations. There are those that deal with, just manufacturing affairs of ensuring that we increase our manufacturers. Those are also members of FKE, all right? Because FKE then looks at what is it that we need to do as a private sector to continuously grow and at the same time look at the welfare of our workers. So labor and employment relations. Jacqueline Mugo is the guest. Jacqueline, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Happy New Year. You know, when you have not seen you, even if it's September.
We have to say Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Happy New Year.
It's a pleasure to be on set in this special show.
Karibu sana. Here we are saying fixing the nation, one conversation at a time. All of us have a role to play in fixing the nation. You, for example, from FKE, there are those ideas that you have come together as private sector, and you say we are seeing our economy heading this way. We are seeing our citizens who are looking for jobs and they're qualified and they're coming into the job market, and we are absorbing them going this way. For us to be able to maintain that equilibrium where we are running a business that's profitable, we have employees who are happy and they are feeling satisfied, and we have a government that we are paying taxes to so that then it can continue offering services, then we have to look at all those. And that's why we've invited you today. So we look at the state of things as they are. Before you get into that conversation, this lady here is called Jano. And she's a wordist. Jano the wordist loves contextualizing quotes, things that have been said. Maybe something that you've said today, she'll pick it up and say, these words were said on Fixing the Nation on the 11th of February, 2025. When Jacqueline Mugo
came to studio.
Right, when Jacqueline Mugo came to studio. So she's going to give you some words, but before she gives you the words, she'll give you the context. Okay. And then she'll ask you whether you can guess who said those words.
Yes. So, no, we try to make sure that it's words that resonate and have been said by people who have, in a sense, just shifted how we think. So this person, I'll give 2 hints. They are, sometimes it's so hard to give too many hints about this person, because let me say, they're one of the most, they're one of the greatest statesmen from Africa, right? And these particular words were said, let's say, just over 33 years ago, right? And so let me read it, see whether you get it. I'm happy to give another hint because the whole idea is that we celebrate these words. But he said, and I quote, "I stand here before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people." Who said that? I stand before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people.
You said you'd give me 2 hints.
Okay, so this was just over 30.
I said Nelson Mandela,
Jacqueline, there
but
were
that's
2.
what everybody says. She gave me 1
There were
hint.
2 hints. There was over 33 years.
Yes, over 33 years. And one of the greatest statesmen.
Yes.
And you're right, it is Nelson Mandela. That was great, right? He said that.
What gave it away?
What gave it away, by the way?
Great statesman, 33 years.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing he would say.
It is the kind of thing he would say. He said it 34 years ago today. It was on February 11th. He had just been released, and he addressed thousands of supporters from the balcony of the Cape Town City Hall, delivering a powerful message of reconciliation, resilience, and the fight for democracy.
Great.
Right. Thank you.
Do they resonate today? I mean, is that what a leader should think of? I'm not a prophet. I'm just one of you. I'm just in this position of privilege to be your leader.
When you think about what leaders say before they become leaders, then yes. That's
before they
become
something shifts when they become, because leadership is servant leadership.
Leadership is about serving. Yes. Giving back. Yeah.
So FKE has, done a lot in advocacy for matters of labor and employment relations, and setting records straight, especially when there appears to be a tussle between employer-employee relations, right? You come in there and you say, all right, so this is where we come from as employers. When the unions come and say, this is where we come from as employees. There's something that you said a couple of weeks ago, and I want us to play that clip to set the tone. Let's play that clip.
I do not believe employees can contain any more deductions to the payslip, because quite a number are not taking home the 1/3 of their earnings. Clearly, if we continue raiding the payslip, it means people will not have any income to take home. So what will they do? They'll have to keep borrowing. They'll be distressed. That eventually translates into social unrest. 57 of our members have declared redundancies over the last 3 years, and 20, we have a breakdown of that. In 2024, we had 20 companies declaring redundancies. In 2026, it was 11, and in 2022, the remaining. Out of this, from our membership, some 5,500 employees were affected, specifically 5,567.
You know, you are speaking so matter-of-factly, Jacqueline, there. Are you raising alarm bells? Or are you just saying?
We are pointing out the reality of how things are in enterprises and on the ground. It's a factual statement based on information we received from members. We do surveys on and off frequently just to hear what's happening in industry, what's the reality on the ground. We are the voice of employers, so we are voicing the reality of what's happening, hoping that policymakers would hear and that we'd have a conversation around it. We do not raise alarm bells. We speak the truth of what is happening from the perspective of business.
Right. When you say 5,000, for example, 5,567 redundancies, what does that mean for an employer? By the time they declare one redundancy to 100 in an organization, sometimes 1,000, what does that mean to an employer and, you know, to the economy at large?
You know, the decision to declare redundancies is a painful last-ditch effort by an employer to save his enterprise. It's not a good sign. And for that particular enterprise, it means scaling down. You can't contain the level of production of business that you had before, and you cannot cope with the payroll and the costs of keeping all the employees you have. It's the opposite of what an enterprise seeks to do, because you want to expand employment and bring in more people. For the economy, it's a warning signal that things are not working and that we need to review the policy and regulatory environment for businesses to reduce the cost of doing business, to keep people in jobs and allow enterprises to expand so that we can create the jobs that we need.
So what, also just following up briefly on what Mariam has just asked, because you've talked about almost like the broader socio-economic factors. We've talked about the fact that a lot of companies are having to lay off. For those who are still trying to seek solutions to just cushion themselves against these rising taxes, what are businesses telling you about how they're coping with, you know, high cost of labor, minimum wage increases? What are they telling you about that?
You know, let's perhaps go back to the period before COVID. Business was already struggling. And they were saying, look, we need to look at the policy environment. We need to look at the regulations that we have, the ease of doing business, the bureaucracies in getting all the permits and the levies, you know, the cost of compliance. So COVID comes, throws us all into a spin. Some companies are still struggling to recover from that. Businesses are saying that Kenya seems to not be in tandem with the reality of what's happening. Instead of supporting businesses, looking at the cost of doing business, looking at how to ease the burden of doing business, we seem to be increasing that burden. We had done very well previously in reducing the licenses, the levies from something like 1,400 to about half of that. So business is saying that we need a conversation as a country to look at all the taxes that business is supposed to be paying. There are very many: corporate tax, pay as you earn, VAT that is levied on goods. You have all sorts of fees and levies. You have the affordable housing levy, digital tax. So it's a whole host of new taxes and levies that have come in. And business is saying, can we rationalize these taxes? Because when we do a count, it adds up to something like 50% of the cost of doing business, and that's very high.
Right.
50%. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was also going to say that's 50%. There's also the cost of compliance that's often overlooked. What does that look like for many businesses, and has it increased over the last year or two?
It has increased significantly over the last year or two. First of all, businesses had to change systems just to be able to remit the taxes to KRA. You know, that was an investment in itself. You have to go through education, training your staff to learn how to use the new equipment, and then you add the levies that I've just talked about. So, and then outside the taxes, there are all sorts of other regulations that for a company are imposed on you. You have to pay a training levy, you have to pay SHA, you have to pay NSSF. It's a whole collection of areas that you need to look at as a business to be compliant. Business wants to be compliant, but can we make it possible? We had a time when some taxes were supposed to be remitted on the 5th of the month, some on the 9th of the month, so we had a conversation around, can it all happen on the same day? So that you know that on the 9th, I remit my taxes and that's it. So business is really looking at a situation where we can come together and rationalize, look at how to facilitate businesses. We're thinking of the small and medium enterprises which cannot cope with this regulatory burden, and it's actually having the opposite effect of pushing more businesses into informality, especially the small ones, the ones that are just on the edge. So we're enhancing informality in a country that needs to grow the formal sector to be able to have the jobs that we need.
I look back at the last couple of years, say last couple of decades, right? And the conversation in this country has been, as we seek to grow our economy, you know, in tandem with our Vision 2030 to become a middle-income industrializing nation by 2030. How many years to 2030? 5. All right, and we can see where we are. But the government has been having this conversation of one of the things that we want to track is the ease of doing business, and even using the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, and taking pride in that, you know, we are making strides in, you know, ease of doing business. We are making it easier for you to come and register a business. We now have a BRS. We are making it easier for you to comply. You know, we now have an online method of just filing your tax returns and even remitting. You don't have to walk with a slip to a bank and then go to KRA at Times Tower to present, you know, all those things. We are making it easier. We have come up with, you know, laws and regulations that consolidate some of these things in business so that we can make it easier. Jacqueline, how have we done in the last 15 years on the ease of doing business? Are we improving? Are we stagnating? Or are we regressing?
We've made some progress. We had made some progress. A lot of good things have happened. I mean, if you think about the Huduma centers, yes, we have digitalized the processing of passports, driving licenses, a whole host of, issues have been made easier. But we seem to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The Huduma centers, for instance, an excellent idea. I happen to sit on some boards that have people in these Huduma centers. Most of the times the systems are down, they're not equipped. Those corporates are not able to facilitate the people there. So people still have the pain of having to wait long periods. We all know the sad story about, for a very long time, we could not issue passports because we do not have the papers. So these kind of things happen and you really wonder. We have good ideas, and that Huduma Center idea, in my view, was excellent, because then you don't have to go to so many different government offices.
It's a one-stop shop.
It's a one-stop shop, but let the one-stop shop work. We reduced the licenses significantly some years back, as I said. Looking at the road networks in terms of infrastructure, a lot of work has happened there. I think the government is also looking at reducing the parastatals because there's a lot of duplication. But if you look at Kenya and the whole governance structure that we have, we're still trying to figure out, so this devolution, how does it work? How do we finance it? These ideas that we have of improving healthcare, improving housing, how do we finance it? How is it that such wonderful ideas end up causing so much pain to the people it's supposed to benefit? So if you look at the totality of the initiatives, the good initiatives the government has had, they have not had the impact that was intended to improve the lives of the people. From a business perspective.
Is it by design or is it via implementation?
It's both.
So some of them were actually designed not to improve things, but to look like they're improving things.
Some of them are rushed. Ideas are good, but before we have refined the process of doing the transition, let's take the NHIF and the SHA, for instance. A great idea. We're in the middle of discussion, then all of a sudden, boom, it's coming into effect.
Yeah.
We're rolling it out.
Yeah.
And we go into a hunky-dory mood and say, everything is in place. You know, it's working, it's working. But the people are saying it's not working.
Yeah.
So I think we rush ideas. And we don't put systems in place. We don't manage transition very well. We don't know what to do with the staff who are in NHIF. What do we do with these people? How do we train them into this SHA, the new idea that we have? So I think it's how we implement ideas that is the problem. And SHA is just an example. It's replicated in a number of areas. And we have said it as FK. We commend the government for these great ideas. But can we sit down as a country, discuss, listen to the experts, because we have a lot of brilliant people in this country who know their stuff, so that we can manage the transition better in
Before
many
Janet
areas.
comes in with her question, how long should we take to implement an idea? Look, the president signed the laws for universal health coverage in October of 2023. SHA was rolled out and the pilot in October of 2024. 12 months. How long should you have taken?
You can't really fix time to it. You can't say 6 months, 3 months. You look at the process, because you lay out the steps that it will take. In business, you manage it as a project, so you know the steps that need to be taken and the time it will take. And the experts will tell you, this is the system we have for us to shift to this system. There's procurement, there's training. So you look at that time frame and you keep checking. So by the time you're saying it's all systems go, are we ready? For business, if you just tell us in the middle of December that come January we have moved to a new system, you're not giving any lead time for business to be ready or even to plan for it. If it has cost implications, like changes in the tax remittance system, you need to give time for business to procure this new system, to train people. So I think it's the capacity to check, to manage the project, and to listen to the people on the ground telling you, because I'm sure a lot of people said, look, we're not ready. But someone, you know, a leader operates on advice as well.
You'll get ready next week. That starts today.
Just start, then we figure it out. I was going to reflect more. I mean, I still will ask a question, but yeah, I think it just speaks to the element of rushing decisions that have dire consequences on people's lives and people's stability. And to Jacqueline's point, just brilliant ideas. Sometimes you can't put a time frame. Sometimes we don't pilot. I don't think we're good at piloting. We're not good at piloting, because that can give you... I know we're talking about employers, and we'll need to speak about the policies, but I do also want to move a little bit to investment, and just want to ask, what kind of policies do you think that the government of Kenya needs to put in place to make investment attractive in Kenya? I know that the focus should really be on easing that burden for the employer, but just shifting a bit to investment, what policies do you think would really help in just making Kenya attractive? I think investors are also beginning to get nervous.
Yeah, you see, Janet, the key thing about attracting investment, first of all, is your image, your brand, your reputation as a country. When you look at Kenya, what comes to mind? As a current investor, as a potential investor. How stable is the business environment? What is the process that the country goes through in changing policies, in introducing new ideas and taxes? We're quite unpredictable as a business environment. You really do not know what the tax regime will be in June 2026. or June 2025, because anything can change. We're in the middle of having a discussion about whether or not to bring back some of the things that were in the finance bill. So that unpredictability and uncertainty makes it very difficult for investors to say, yes, let's go to Kenya, because they can't plan. The business operates on scenarios. You make assumptions based on the facts that you have, and you think that if a country has this tax regime, it will be in place for a while. If you have these labor laws, they'll be in place for a while. If you have these regulatory processes, but then things change very rapidly, and that is one of the main problems that we have. Otherwise, Kenya is a very attractive investment destination. We have the skills, we have the infrastructure, we have the people. Even culturally, living in Kenya is wonderful. But if you want to do business, and that's why we're losing businesses, it's very difficult for you to plan. So for business, I think that's the main thing. Sometimes the rhetoric in the country, causes some nerves, but I think everybody knows Kenya always fixes the issue somehow.
A little anxiety.
I want to take us into a break, and then you come back and continue this conversation. I know Mariam has very many questions.
I do.
I mean, she's been preparing for this. She's Zillennial. You know what a Zillennial is, Jackie?
No, I don't.
It's the bridge, quote unquote, between Gen Z and millennials. That's bridge. And when you're in there, like you have some millennial tendencies, you have some Gen Z tendencies.
So you're Zillennial.
Zillennial,
In other words, your workforce. Okay? The people in the workspace, right? So she's got many questions, including maybe this one by Horace Mandera on our YouTube live stream is a good one. Good morning, Jano, Eric, and Mariam. Great conversation. Most of the pay slips are currently in ICU. Running a business is expensive. Can you ask today's guest on the way forward? So prepare for that. Yes, let's take all your questions and feedback on our live streams on YouTube, on Facebook, on TikTok, on X, and we'll be sampling them as the conversations continue. This is Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time. Jacqueline Mugo, the Executive Director and CEO of the Federation of Kenya Employers, Kenya chapter. No, it's Kenya Employers. Duh. We'll be back shortly. Keep it here. With Jacqueline Mugo, the FKE Executive Director, who's here with us now. Zillennial. Fine.
Ako na maswali.
Niko na maswali mengi. Maswali ni mengi, muda ni mchache. Since COVID, we've seen a change in, business practice, how we operate, what offices look like, what employment looks like. So many things have changed. What is considered best practice, I'm sure, has also changed globally, right? There's a feeling amongst young people that employment of now is not the same as employment of yesteryears. Before, I was guaranteed career growth, one. If I stick it long enough, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I get a promotion, I get a this. For some reason, the numbers were working such that I could buy a small house or a small plot somewhere, buy a car, take the children to school. Now, it doesn't seem to be working as such. So then the question is, how do employers in Kenya adjust to now fit the growing needs of the labor market, which are something is not working here, either monetarily or growth-wise or hours-wise or, working from home, all of these things, right? How do employers now meet the workforce halfway? Because they're saying, if this was the good old days, I would be content with working this way. But we're not living in those times, and something needs to shift.
It's true that a lot has changed in the world of work, the way work is done. We've been discussing maybe over the last 5 years or so about the future of work, but that future is here.
Right.
So both how work is done, where work is done, and who does that work has changed. It's a conversation employers have been having. Those coming into the world of work now have also changed. And that is something perhaps we were not so prepared for as Kenya, but we've been forced to. COVID forced everybody to go back to the drawing board and forced us to start working digitally, to accept the idea of one working off-site, away from the office, working part-time, working all sorts of hours. The 9-to-5 idea has changed. The skills that are needed in businesses have changed. So business has had to invest in technology to allow work to be done off-site and to find ways of managing people working off-site. And also to accept that the Gen Z, the new generation, and the one you've said you are, which is
Zillennial.
How you want to work. You don't necessarily want to work for one employer and work fixed hours. So that has forced businesses to rethink. There's also the reality of the demand for office space. A lot of businesses realized they actually did not need all the offices they had.
Right.
So, and some have scaled down because they haven't actually picked up to the period before COVID. So the conversation about digitization, AI, and the impact it's having on work is a huge one. Employers are adjusting, some have adjusted, some are still adjusting. It's an ongoing conversation. And I think the challenge here is how do we get the skills to be developed in tandem with the technology and the changes that are required in workplaces, allowing women, for instance, to work part-time, to do job sharing. These are things we are learning as we go.
Right.
But the mindset is right. But as businesses, we've realized that we have to change with the realities of the world of work if we're to keep our people in jobs, and also the reality that businesses can't give long-term contracts because of the things we're talking about.
Right.
It's just not possible to say you'll be able to keep these 100 people in jobs because you don't know what's going to happen with regard to the policy environment, the cost of doing business, and the challenges we have are both domestic and external. The world there is also very complicated and changing. So the form of work and the nature of contracts that are being given are short-term contracts, not necessarily for a job, but to do a task.
Yep.
And once the task is done, the
On
job
to
is
the-
done.
on to
Our relationship is done.
Yes.
Until the next time.
Is there also a skill gap on the other end between what employers want and what institutions of higher learning, TVETs, universities are churning out? Is that also something that needs bridging?
That's a huge issue. That, again, has been under discussion for a number of years. I don't know how many interviews I've done on the skills mismatch. What is industry doing? What are employers doing? It's a conversation that we've had with industry. You know, we've invested a lot in TVET, not just Kenya, but Africa is doing that because there was a time we went crazy and converted every middle-level polytechnic
Into
Into
university.
into a university. Then we realized, whoops, we don't have middle-level skills. We need polytechnics, we need hands-on people, and the nature of hands-on people we need now has also changed because of technology. So there are lots of conversations happening, lots of projects and partnerships, but not fast enough. Kenya now has a qualification authority that is looking at the qualification frameworks and how to harmonize so that we know that people coming from different learning institutions have the skills that can be recognized. But we're still far from home. There's work happening, but it's not fast enough. There's a disconnect between the needs of industry and the needs and the curriculum being taught in the various learning institutions. There's a challenge of data. We don't have data. It's not a Kenyan problem. It's a global problem. What are the future skills that are needed by businesses in 5-10 years? We don't have data to be able to inform these decisions. But we need, as business and the world of learning and the policymakers, government, to have a conversation around how do we impact the curriculums? How do we modernize the equipment in the learning institutions to reflect the realities of the motor industry, for instance?
When things are moving so quickly.
So quickly, and
Right.
Kenya is stuck in equipment we had 30 years ago.
But Jacqueline, let's also now, I agree, and I completely agree, skills mismatch, okay?
Yes.
How we are teaching the future labor in our institutions of learning may not be matching what the industry needs. But is the industry in Kenya advancing? Can we say that today, for example, that we have industries that you've just given us, the motor vehicle sector? How many assembly plants do we have in Kenya? And do they have today's technology in those factories? How many industries in Kenya are actually up to speed in terms of technology? Because maybe, because of whatever other factors, our industries are still operating as 2005, with 2005 technology.
We have perhaps two levels. The private sector is up to date, by and large. I mean, if you're looking at Toyota, Isuzu, they're up to date. They have to be, because they're operating in a global market. So we've been, as the Federation of Kenya Employers, talking to government about, can we have better partnerships with industry to use the learning institutions, the training centers that industry has to train even for the public sector? Because we don't have the finances necessarily as a country to invest in the technology that is needed. If you look at the public sector training institutions, we have the NITA, the TVETs, they don't have the equipment. I mean, government is trying to negotiate and to buy, but
let me push back.
They don't have it.
Let's look at, one of the things that we see constantly wherever we are, road construction sector, or even buildings construction sector. Are they up to date in technology? Until the Chinese came and they were doing the expressway, and we saw the things that they were lifting, heavy, long concrete pillars, and they were building that viaduct. Our local contractors here, they go with those brushes on the road.
Who does that come back to? Who is
Lami on the road?
The buck stops with
Are you telling
for
us
the
our
regulations?
texts are not
The National Construction Authority? I don't know. Kura, Kenha?
Yeah, industry as well. Is industry equipped for the future? Our industry is not.
If you look at it broadly, we are not. There are some sectors which are more advanced than others. We are not consistent in terms of the investment we make in modernizing our equipment. I mean, if you're talking about the construction sector, you know the challenges we've had in some of the buildings that have come up. We also have a challenge. Sometimes we may even have the equipment and the right skills, but we just don't do the right thing because of ethics, That kicks in as well. People want to cut corners to be able to make money and take risks with people's lives. So you have to address the technology, which, yes, there's a big gap there, but also the human element. The level of expertise and commitment to professional standards is an issue. This is something we've been talking about. I mean, the anti-corruption was blaming professionals for being the drivers of corruption in this country. As a professional, I can't say they're wrong because who does these things? It's people who know the right thing who don't do it. So I think it's a whole mix of interventions that we need. We need the right investment because sometimes when you go to procure the equipment, what do we procure? As a country, do we actually buy the modern state-of-the-art, or do we cut corners?
Do we cut corners to take something more affordable? A question here from Morgan Dave. You may have alluded to it, but we can discuss what specific strategies is FKE proposing to the government to address the high tax burden on employees and the issue of pending bills owed to companies?
We have proposed a whole raft of interventions to government. First of all, is just stability in the business environment. Not having such frequent changes that business cannot plan, giving business time, if there's to be a change, having a conversation and proper public participation. Looking at the reality of the fiscal frameworks that we have, it's very unpredictable. So we have proposed, for instance, that can we have stability for the next 1 or 2 years and not have any more changes? For the employee, because I know that's what he's asking, if we're introducing taxes, for instance, the housing levy or SHA, could it be imposed on the basic salary as opposed to total earnings? Because that has a huge implication on the employee's take-home pay. If you're going to deduct tax on someone's DSA, daily subsistence allowance, or transport allowance, what are you saying? That transport allowance is given because you realize he needs 1,000 bob a month to come to work.
Right.
So if you tax it, it's not enough. So the base of the tax is a challenge for us, and we've talked about that. We've talked about the pending bills. And the figures that FKE gave are actually from the public sector. It's from the budget policy statement that shows that business is owed 1 billion cumulatively from the government, the state corporations, and the county governments. That's a huge amount of money. So we're asking that these pending bills be paid because it's impacting the cash flows of companies. It interferes with the circulation of money and is bringing businesses,
to their knees,
and some are collapsing. So we need to do the right thing to facilitate businesses. So those are some of the interventions FKE has proposed.
So with that, actually, we had the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Economic Planning last week, John Buddy, and he said, look, what we did with the tax laws amendment towards the end of the year, and which was signed in December by the president, was actually addressing some of these issues. So now, the deduction, especially for housing levy and for social health authority, are now coming as a deductible. So we are not taxing it. We are first of all looking at, here's your gross, then deduct NHIF, NSSF, housing levy, and then that is now what is taxed as payee. Any impact on that?
We haven't felt it as yet.
Are you aware that this is what the tax laws amendment actually passed?
I think it's still very new. If it's an idea in the offing, it's new.
It's now in law.
We haven't felt the impact of it yet. It's perhaps going to impact this month's payroll. So far, business has not grasped that yet, the import of it. So I think we need a conversation with Treasury. They need to come out perhaps and explain, and so that we can see the numbers. What's the impact is going to have on the payroll, on the tax levels being paid by companies? Is it significant? So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, perhaps when we're clear on it, hoping it will have something significant to bring the 50% plus deductions to something significantly lower.
Because it also impacts what you are then also paying, but it doesn't. It doesn't really change. If you are still doing 2.75% as an employer, yours is still 2.75%.
Right.
Yeah.
It hasn't reduced the burden on employers. It's just maybe slightly on employees, as he was calculating here for us.
On the issue of NSSF is also going to go up, which is a good thing. But if you take the totality of the payroll deductions, we supported the NSSF increase because Kenyans were retiring with no money. The pension was ridiculously low. But it's the totality of all the payroll deductions that we are raising an alarm about that is too high.
How would you like it done? FKE sits on the board of NSSF, does it not?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So you're right there in terms of overseeing the management of employees' contributions and employers' contributions into their pension.
Yes.
So first, two things. One, justify why we need to pay this hefty, because you're saying you support it. Why do we need to pay so much money
for NSSF?
For NSSF.
It's not so much money, actually, because for NSSF, there is an upper limit. You may not have known, but in the first year, actually, that upper limit, you only paid it up to 18,000. It will go to 36. The highest it will be, I think, is 72,000. That the 6% will be levied on. So it will be something like 4,000. Why we are supporting that is because it's actually savings for the employee. And because we're on the board, and the board is observing governance now, actually, they haven't had any scandals, if you realized. That money is well managed. In any case, it's outsourced. You know, the law changed several years back. People need to retire with decent pensions, and there are global benchmarks, which Kenya hasn't met as at now. It should be 50-60%. So that is the idea behind increasing the pension deductions, because the reality, as you know, Eric, when people retire, they don't survive beyond 5 years because it's just too difficult. And we need to make life post work. We need to make life in retirement livable for people.
Touch on something you've said, specifically with regards to NSSF. So there's sometimes a feeling amongst employees. One, not even a feeling. There's issues of remittances, for example. Sometimes the KRA or NSSF, etc., NHIF will say, we're not getting the remittances from employers, right? They can see their pay slips, it's less this, it's less that, it's less that, but it is not going to the end source, which is your Kenya Revenue Authority, now SHA, affordable housing, etc. And then on the other end, when people retire, getting their pensions also becomes a problem, but that's another issue that doesn't have anything to do with employers, but that's a big question. So for a lot of employees, the question is why? Why should I continue this, remittances and, paying my taxes and doing all of this when there's holes and clearly, it's not getting to the end use. So I go to look for my healthcare and I'm told you're not up to date. I go to, it's time for my pension and there's still a problem there. Sometimes people do feel like, I would love to do these remittances, but haziendi penye zinafaa kwenda.
That's true. There are some sectors where there has been a challenge in remittance of statutory deductions, especially in the public sector, I must say. As far as I know, the private sector is compliant. KRA will come down on you so hard if you don't remit. But you see, if it's the public sector, it's difficult, because how does KRA come down heavily on that? For instance, the county governments, according to the budget policy statement, has not remitted some 91.2 billion shillings in pension. They have arrears of that amount. So some public sector entities have struggled. Sometimes they also don't pay the statutory contributions, perhaps because they don't get the allocation from government in time. So that's a challenge.
Sure, but Jacqueline, even in the private sector, like I can speak from personal experience, your payslip comes less, 30%, Then when you're looking for a tax compliance certificate, KRA is saying your employer did not remit on this month and on this month and on this month.
And therefore you're not tax compliant.
Yes, and they're not tax compliant. But that's not money that is in my pocket. So and for some reason you will be the one to deal with it, even though they know that it is the employer that did not remit.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But to be honest, in my 15 plus years working I haven't had that story from any of our members that they have not remitted. But there have been reports in the past, some years back. I know some banks, one bank that didn't remit and had to sell a building because they were not remitting. In the SACCOs sector, there's that challenge where deductions are made and it's not remitted. But the Federation stands for fair labor practice. We encourage our members to comply. And if there's a challenge, we are in fairly close conversations with KRA. They would come to us because we partner. Whenever there's a change, they come to us. Can we have joint meetings? We have webinars to alert, because we believe that employers should comply with their duty to deduct the statutory deductions. We try to engage government not to have it increase, but once that happens, we encourage members to comply. And it is not right for any entity not to remit statutory deductions from employees, because that's the employee's money. You're in essence borrowing from an employee.
So why can people raise those concerns? What happens? Is it, I mean, I know it's individual, but how do you, if it's Mariam, for example, and she's having that issue, who do you address? Where do you raise it? Where are you able to?
She'd have to go to a public body, like maybe the anti-corruption, because she's not a member of a trade union, for instance. We represent corporates as FKE, but if employees alert us about a specific employer having an issue, we would have conversation with that entity just to find out what's happening and then encourage compliance.
I know we're coming to the top of the hour, and maybe you've already spoken to this, but I'm curious to know from you, in the greater scheme of everything we've talked about, trying to cushion employers and make things fair for employees, on the one hand, what are you most optimistic about in terms of what could be if you're able to consolidate what you're recommending and whether the government will listen? And what are you most nervous about if the recommendations that you give are not adhered to? So what are you most optimistic about? What are you most nervous about?
Well, the good book says, without hope, the people perish.
This is true.
So we have to have hope. As employers, we are hoping for engagement with the government and for some of our proposals to be taken into account, because we want to partner with government. It doesn't do any good for our country for always to be at loggerheads, to have conversations. Private sector says one thing, government says another thing. It's not a political issue. It's just coming together to discuss and listening and accommodating the views of the Federation of Kenya Employers, because we believe that we have, as a country, a lot of potential to attract new investments, to grow the private sector. I think the worst that could happen is for the government not to listen to the private sector. For some of the ideas we have not to be taken into account. We are a country that believes in public participation, and I think that is there. You know how we got to the constitution we have. So we are hoping that we would follow that and work together to build a country that is stable and that attracts investments and grows jobs instead of losing jobs.
Jacqueline, we thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll invite you again for more conversations. As you engage the government, just let us know. By the way, we have had a meeting with the government, and they have promised this and the other. We'll help you to track those promises by just putting it out there to the community of fixers and saying, The business community has said this is their idea. The government has said, sounds like a very good idea. We shall take it under advisement. And then we shall say, now let's follow it up and see. I like the people who are joining our conversations online, on TikTok, on X, and there are very many comments. Just before we go, let's give you some of those comments. One of them is a very, very active person on YouTube. He's called Star Kenya. Just go with this. Businesses have simply refused to grow their enterprises by doing the same old. That's what Star Kenya says. He's an agent provocateur. The problem is squarely with business leadership. There's a big problem there, and they'll grasp at anything, skills, blah, 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 to justify incompetence.
Our Star.
Star. It would be good to actually point an example and say, like, in this particular case, so that then we enrich that debate and others can join in
and give us solutions.
And then we see, all right, so what exactly are we talking about and how would we fix it going forward? What else are they saying?
No, on TikTok, it's more or less the same, that it's up to the private sector to fix what is happening. I'm seeing quite a lot of people from Kisumu. I think what wamesema serikali tosha. Now it's like, okay, how do we fix from the other end? I'm seeing someone saying it's a hard nut to crack. That's Kelvin. Seeing people talking about the status of their payslip and saying it's basically in shambles. So I think that's the overall feeling, that we need to fix these payslips, and of course the larger issue of employment in Kenya. And I think maybe that's a conversation we can continue at some other time, Jacqueline. How do we get more people into this quote-unquote formal employment? Because sometimes it feels like the burden of taxation is placed very heavily on a very small group of people. Yes. As opposed to spreading the tax burden evenly across the population.
John Kagwanja says the paying of the payslip will be a key thing in the 2027 election. Whoever wants to be president must address this issue convincingly. Well, I think not just president, but all levels of leadership. Right. Because the cost of business at county level, an MCA ought to understand this. Governor ought to understand this. A member of the National Assembly, a member of the Senate ought to understand this. We thank you for all these conversations. I mean, all the comments and the questions, the debate, like the one that's been started by Star Kenya. Let's continue engaging and let's continue this debate. Fixing the nation, one conversation at a time. The next conversation is the whole debacle about issuance of IDs. Must you present yourself for vetting or must you not? Is it equal for all or it should not be equal for all? That's the conversation. And our guest is Abdirazak Ismail Sheikh. He's a resident of Garissa. We'll open up the phone lines as well so that you can join in. We'll also call in some of the leaders from these regions and hear, so what is it that you're advocating for or against, and so on and so forth. Keep it here. We'll be back shortly.